Princess Charlotte didn't cry or scream. She merely stood there, her shoulder red, her cheek pale, and her eyes fixed on the woman who had hit her. But before the shock could wear off, a royal guard moved forward, broke formation, and said something that no guard had ever said to a queen consort. "You've just attacked the future of this kingdom." What came next wasn't a scandal. It was a quiet war. Before I tell you how it all happened, make sure you're subscribed and turned on the bell icon. Also, leave a comment letting us know where in the world you're watching from. What you're about to see isn't just about tradition. It's about what happens when a child is protected by more than blood. That Tuesday morning, the sun shone down on Windsor Castle, bathing the east lawn in soft spring light. There were cherry blossoms all over the courtyard, and staff would sweep them up later. For the charity unveiling, a tiny white tent had been set up. The Princess of Wales was the main host of the occasion. Children's choirs from all over the country. This was the kind of event that seemed innocent in press releases but took weeks of arranging. Sergeant Alaric Denham stood at parade rest just outside the gathering that was sitting down. His job today wasn't ceremonial. Other guards were keeping an eye on the perimeter. They had put him on purpose next to the royal enclosure, right behind the row where Princess Charlotte would sit. No one needed to explain why. Guards like Denham had learned to read assignments in Helmand Province, where the only thing that kept a convoy from being ambushed was their gut feeling. The princess and her mother and brothers came in the middle of the morning. She wore a powder blue coat and had her hair neatly braided. Her steps showed that she had learned to walk carefully at a young age. She waved when she was supposed to, and smiled when it was acceptable, but as she sat down she looked about with the calm interest of a child who knew she couldn't act like one. Denham kept an eye on her from his post. She made him think of the kids he had seen on patrol, the ones who had too much weight on their shoulders. This one, on the other hand, has hundreds of years of history written across her back. 7 years ago, he met Queen Elizabeth once in an official capacity, when he looked at the household division privately. She stopped in front of him, looked around his service rooms, and asked him one question. "Afghanistan?" He had nodded. She had said something that he would never forget. The ones who have seen the worst often protect the best. There was no handshake or ceremony, simply an understanding that responsibility came in various clothing, but was still important. Charlotte had her eyes. Queen Camilla came over the aisle with a lot less warmth. She quickly nodded, accepted the bouquet, and sat down without saying anything to Charlotte or the kids on stage. Denham noticed that the mood had changed. The pressure had dropped. Her face didn't reflect the stress, but the way she held her purse, with her knuckles white and then too loose, did. Whenever someone talked to William in front of her, her lips pinched together. She seemed off balance, like Charlotte's presence attracting the journalists and cameras was somehow stealing her breath. Denham had seen this kind of body language before. No, not just in war zones, but also among officers who didn't like not being the center of attention. Jealousy had its own way of standing. The choir started singing, and the loud voices pierced through the spring breeze. In the distance, cameras clicked softly. The important people grinned. Charlotte smiled when a vocalist from her school took the front microphone. Denham let his eyes move over the audience again, but they always came back to Camilla. She wasn't paying attention to the stage. She was keeping an eye on the child. Not looking, watching, with her jaw still and one hand twitching over the top of her pocketbook. Denham had been next to snipers. He knew what it looked like when things were still. The edge of the canopy moved with the wind. It seemed like a tranquil day, but his shoulders knew better. The longer Denham stood guard, the more obvious the pattern became. Camilla wasn't moving because she was uncomfortable. She was angry, ticking. Her gaze scarcely touched the choir. Every now and then she bent over and whispered fiercely to an aide, her voice low and her jaw tense. Denham couldn't hear the words, but he could tell by the way they were spoken that they were short, contemptuous, and corrective. Princess Charlotte sat across the aisle with her hands in her lap, and her feet tucked respectfully under her seat. But she wasn't clueless. Denham saw her looking sideways, fast, practiced looks that any adult may miss. She knew something was off. The next choir was done. The yard was filled with applause. Charlotte leaned forward to tell her brother something as the kids left the stage. Camilla squinted. One of her assistants gave her something from a document pouch, perhaps a cue sheet. She hid it away. Denham moved his heel a little, which gave him a better view of both Camilla and the row of seats. He didn't touch the earpiece. No signal, no radio check. But old instincts were stirring in his thoughts, the kind that prompted him to duck before an IED went off, or to turn just as a door opened. He hadn't felt this way in years, not in the royal courtyards, not at ceremonies, and not even when he saw important people pose for pictures. But now he did. Again, Camilla looked at Charlotte. Denham got the whole look this time. Nor fury, nor even hate, but resentment. Deep, boiling, intimate. He moved his stance half an inch closer, which was so small that only another guardsman would have seen. But Charlotte did. She looked up at him for a second. Denham did something he didn't often do while on duty. He nodded once, but not very much. Charlotte gazed back at the stage, and she was calmer. He also knew that expression from her. He had seen it happen in refugee camps when a child found one adult who wouldn't leave. He didn't like that she had to use it. Staff set up a display board for the kids' artwork across the lawn. The kids had drawn crayon pictures labeled "My Royal Hero" to give to family members. Nice gesture. But Camilla's eyes widened when she saw that Charlotte's name was already written on one of the bigger paintings. Denham didn't require a list of weaponry, didn't need a way out. He only had to see that simple gesture. Camilla's hand tightening around the edge of the chair and her lips getting thinner until they were almost gone. He had seen similar look on the faces of tribal elders just before they gave instructions that killed him. She wasn't going to stand up and leave. She was going to do something that couldn't be undone. Denham would no longer be standing guard when she did. He would be moving to protect. The kids proudly showed out their drawings. Little hands held colorful boards, and each sketch showed crowns, carriages, and family portraits that appeared more like hearts than real life. When it was Charlotte's turn, she stood up straight, took the paper with a tiny bow, and then sat back down. The crowd clapped warmly. Camilla didn't clap. Denham's eyes moved across her face as the air seemed to get thinner. She leaned forward so that her voice could just barely reach Charlotte. "You think this is yours, don't you?" Charlotte whirled around with surprise. "Not yours, but my great-great-grandmother's." She spoke in a meticulous way, like a child who was rectifying a mistake. The remarks weren't loud, yet they hurt more than any headline. Denham heard it crack across the grass. Camilla's face went blank and then twisted. The anger, sharp and sudden, was shown. There was no doubt in her mind that her hand would go up, not a gesture or a flick of the finger, but a full swing. The slap hit Charlotte's arm and shoulder with a sound that was loud enough to quiet the audience. The choir, the photographers, and the helpers all stopped moving. Charlotte gasped softly, and her body jerked back against the chair. Not a single tear fell from her eyes. Instead, her chin went up, and her eyes were watery but defiant. Denham had seen the same stubborn jaw in her father. His training had taught him to hold back. A royal guard won't move until there is a real threat. Protocol said he had to radio for senior staff, wait for permission, and let the system handle it through the right channels. But Denham had worked in enough bureaucratic settings to know what it did. It went through. It took longer. It put institutions ahead of people. And in the time it took for the machine to turn, kids got wounded. He had seen it happen in Helmand, where the rules of engagement said to wait for confirmation while civilians fled toward firing. He had buried the translator who had faith that help was on the way. He wrote the letter to a mother to explain why protocol was more important than her son. Not today. Everything about Afghanistan came pouring back to him. The alley where he had stood between an innocent youngster and a militant's weapon, and the convoy where he had dragged a bleeding interpreter to safety, even though he had been told to hold the line. He moved forward. As he stepped away from his post, the polished boots echoed on the stone. His shoulders were set, and his gun was firmly at his side. The crowd gasped. Cameras recorded every second. A dozen aides got up halfway, not sure if they should stop him or protect themselves. "That's enough." His voice broke the silence. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp and commanding. It carried like a soldier's voice does, from the diaphragm to the ground. Camilla turned around quickly, her eyes flaming. "Stand down, guard." But Denham didn't back down. He stood in front of Charlotte, making his body a wall between her and the consort. Charlotte's hand immediately shot out and grabbed the back of his tunic, as if she needed something substantial to hold on to. He didn't move or flinch. Just being there made her feel better. The grass was quiet except for the quick clicks of phones filming what had just happened. Camilla's voice got low and angry. "Do you know who I am? You will regret this." Denham's stare didn't waver. "I know exactly who you are, Mom, and I know who she is." He looked back to the small girl behind him on purpose, then back at Camilla. "I swear to the crown, its heirs, and its future. If you raise your hand again, I won't stand still." The audience gasped. There was never a royal guard who talked like Wei, neither in public or in front of a queen consort. Charlotte's grip on his tunic got tighter. Denham's body stayed still as stone, yet every line of him showed what his words had already said. This was no longer a ceremony. It was safety. "Get out of the way, guardsmen." Camilla's voice was high-pitched now. "That's an order." Denham didn't budge. The lawn held its breath. Charlotte stood behind him, her petite body framed by the red of his tunic and the stillness of his shadow. She hadn't spoken anything else, but her fingers were still holding onto the fabric of his coat. Camilla moved one step closer. "I told him to stand down and go back to his post right away. Or else." Denham's voice was low but steady. "This stops here." The words went over the courtyard. The people who worked at the palace stopped moving. Without realizing it, photographers lowered their cameras. It looked like even the birds that had been chirping near the rose bushes stopped. "You don't get to choose that," Camilla said angrily. "You take orders because you're a guard." Finally, Denham turned to face her directly. His posture didn't change, but his voice was suddenly steel. "Not a rebellion, but something older and deeper. I promised the crown, not a single person, and definitely not someone who hurts a child of the monarchy." "You dare call me unfit," she said. "I didn't say unfit," he said without blinking. "I said it was dangerous." Underneath her powdered cheeks, Camilla's face turned pale. "The way you act, the way you stand, and the things you say threaten the dignity of this place. And today your hand threatened its air." Charlotte moved a little behind him, as if she wanted to say something, but then she stopped. Denham looked down over his shoulder. He replied softly, "You're safe. Only for her. No one else will touch you." A tremble in her breath. Then silence. Denham looked back at Camilla. "Mom, I should be kicked out of the service for stepping out of line. But if stepping forward means protecting the future queen of this country from being hit again, then I accept those consequences." For the first time, Camilla's voice broke. "You think this show will save you? You'll be caught and put in jail. You'll lose everything." His answer came quickly and calmly. "Then I'll lose it with pride." The crowd started to mutter. Phones recorded all that was said. People in charge of the rows of chairs started to whisper rapidly over earpieces, but Denham was still between them. Charlotte moved forward a little and looked around his side. She gazed at Camilla, not with fear, but with something older, almost royal. "I'm sorry I upset you," she murmured softly. "But you can't hurt people when you're mad." The words hit her with a weight that was far heavier than her age. Camilla blinked, and for a second there was something on her face that looked like shame. Then anger took its place. But before she could say anything else, she heard footfall coming quickly across the stone. Denham didn't change. He didn't have to, because every guard knew that gate. William, the prince, was arriving. The sound of polished leather hitting stone resonated through the courtyard. Prince William didn't wait. He walked through the motionless crowd with a tight face, pale lips, and eyes focused on the gap between Denham and his daughter, not on the press or the important people. When he spoke, his voice was low and careful. What happened? No address from the king. No showy things. 3 words, flat and deadly. Charlotte moved out from behind the guard, but her chin was still up and her cheeks were hot from the hit. "She hit me." The words were so softly that they barely got through, but they hit hard. William's face didn't move at all, not even a blink, but his breathing changed. It got sharper and slower. Denham didn't turn to look at him. "Confirmed, sir. I saw the action. Intentional contact delivered with force." Camilla's mouth fell open. She said the wrong thing. I was correcting her because she was being rude." William gave her a gaze that was so icy it hurt. "You hit my daughter in front of an armed guard and an audience. And you want a reason?" "It wasn't like that," Camilla said again, stepping forward. "It was a mistake. There was no misunderstanding," Denham stated with certainty. A helper in the court nodded from the outside. One of the supervisors of the child choir raised her hand. "I saw it too, Your Highness." More whispers now. The air had changed a lot. Whatever power Camilla had over the room through her name, rank, or status was fading. William didn't get closer or increase his voice, but when he spoke again, he sounded like a royal. "I stand with the guard." Camilla looked like she was going to pass out. "Excuse me." He acted on his oath. "On behalf of the crown, on behalf of my daughter," he said, turning and putting a hand on Charlotte's shoulder. "Which is more than I can say for you." The reporters didn't need to ask for permission. The cameras clicked one after the other. Flashes started to strobe behind the bushes. An aide was already on the phone with a lawyer in the rear. But none of that mattered now, not to Denham, for Charlotte's hand slipped back into his and squeezed softly. That was the only time he let himself breathe. William nodded again, this time at Denham. "Take my daughter inside and stay with her until I tell you to leave." Denham bent down a little. "Yes, sir." Camilla stood alone, with attendants all around her who were too scared to look her in the eye. As Denham dragged Charlotte away, The wind gathered up, making his body a living shield. He didn't turn around. He didn't have to, since everything behind him had already started to fall apart. The only sound in the room was the ticking of the grandfather clock that was hidden behind two oak-paneled shelves. The light from the afternoon sun came through the stained glass and painted the floor in broken reds and golds. It wasn't a place for ceremony. It was a place to make decisions. Prince William, Princess Catherine, Colonel Hargrave of the Coldstream Guards, and Sergeant Elaric Denham were all inside. Denham was standing at attention in full dress uniform, with his bare flesh tucked under one arm. Charlotte had been moved to a safe place. The choice had already been made. She wouldn't have to talk about anything that had happened at this meeting. Colonel Hargrave put his hands together. "Sergeant, tell your story." Denham was clear. No hesitation, no embellishment. After the third choir performance, Her Royal Highness Princess Charlotte corrected Queen Camilla on a verbal historical reference. In response, the Queen Consort struck her with an open hand to the upper left shoulder and neck area. This was intentional, and there was no loss of balance or misfire, as witnessed by civilians, personnel, and security aides. I stepped forward to protect the princess and gave a verbal command. Queen Camilla tried to override this with an order to return to post, but I refused. I declared my intent to protect, and told her that my oath was to the crown, not to her. Colonel Hargrave did not say anything. William also stayed quiet, letting each word sink in. "You have set yourself against the king's consort," William replied at last. Denham looked him in the eye. "No, sir. She put herself against the crown." There was something in the hush that followed. It was hefty and full with meaning. Catherine's gaze went to her lap for a moment, but William didn't move. "That phrase," whispered softly, "could live on after we're all gone." Colonel Hargrave cleared his throat. "Sir, with all due respect, this soldier broke the rules in the field, but what he did was more than what those rules said." William slowly nodded. "He kept the spirit of it alive." He turned around and stared at Denham. "Do you know what this means?" "Yes, sir. You are now a symbol." "I didn't want to be one," William said. "That's what makes it honest." He stood up and walked to the window. The courtyard was almost empty now, except for that. Camilla was gone. She had officially withdrawn for the afternoon. But in this room, the monarchy was no longer passive. William looked back at them. Sergeant Denham is now directly responsible for protecting Her Royal Highness Princess Charlotte. His authority is above all ceremonial rules until further notice. Hargrave lifted an eyebrow but didn't say anything. The heir had given the command. William went on. "I want to know what people think of Queen Camilla." Catherine looked up. "Public or private?" William's jaw tightened. "Start private for now, but don't get it wrong. This place doesn't protect abuse, not even from the inside." He looked at Denham again. "You'll feel pressure from all sides. Some people will say you went too far." Denham said, "I didn't move until she did. Then we'll go with you." Colonel Hargrave lightly tapped his pen on the table. "Then the guard's position is now the crown's position." It wasn't said with flair. Someone spoke that like an order. At that moment, there was no fanfare for the declaration of war. It was said in quiet. That night, Clarence's house was still, too still for Camilla's taste. The lights were turned down and the windows were closed. But in her private salon, she strode angrily over the Persian carpeting, holding a crystal tumbler of gin in one hand and her phone in the other. "Useless," she said under her breath as she stabbed the call button again. "All of them are spineless." The aide on the other end spoke in a strained voice. "Ma'am, communications hasn't approved the statement you asked for about the incident. They're waiting for Buckingham's order." Her voice got sharper. "There is no order. I am the Queen Consort." "Not anymore," came the answer, which was so quiet that it might not have been meant for her to hear. She hung up the phone. 3 staff members remained still and unsure across the room. One has worked with her since she was a duchess. The other one was new and had just graduated from college. All 3 knew better than to give advice. Camilla was mad about more than only Denham. It wasn't even about Charlotte, even though she had cursed the girl more than once that day. It was about losing control, losing the story, and losing your place. She had fought her way to this point, not via family ties or tradition, but by rigorous planning. And now, after just one afternoon, it was falling apart. That damn guard had not only gone against her, he had put a boundary between her and the royal family. William had picked a foot soldier over her, though. When she was alone, she yelled at everyone who would listen. He made me feel bad. He let her talk first and accuse me like I'm the one who doesn't belong. One aide had the guts to say something. "We believe that several staff witnesses may have already given statements. There are recordings going around, including civilian footage." Camilla's shoulders got stiff. "Discredit them. Say they misread." Misremembered. Charlotte tripped. Say that, but even she could hear how empty it was. You couldn't take a slap out of the public view, especially not when it was on the television. She took a different approach. She called in old favors, hinted at legal overreach, accused the guard of being overdramatic, and William of being dangerously populist, but nothing changed. 2 of her clients had already quietly asked to put off planned appointments until they could examine their schedules. The way it was said was diplomatic. The meaning wasn't there. 3 of Charles's senior aides had stopped answering her calls. Even her private secretary, who had been with her for 10 years, had asked for personal leave to think about what to do next. The palace wasn't trying to take over. It was just stepping back and letting gravity do its thing. People were already talking differently behind the castle walls. People who used to smile at her now looked right through her. The press hadn't published anything yet, at least nothing that would make people angry. But the lack of spin was a sign in its own right. No defense meant there were no defenders. She dumped the gin down the sink. Her reflection in the mirror looked older than she remembered, not dethroned but unmade. The last aide left for the night, and the door closed quietly behind her. Camilla remained alone in silence, still hoping that this could be fixed. She knew she hadn't lost the public, though, since she thought about it. Not yet. She had lost the palace, and it wasn't going to come back. There was nothing but quiet in the long gallery at St. James's Palace. There was no red carpet or ceremony, just antique paintings on the walls, watching as the present chose the future below them. Prince William was in the middle of the room next to Princess Catherine. Behind them, senior advisors from the royal family stood still, watching but without taking part. Sergeant Alaric Denham stood like a guard at William's left shoulder. Charlotte was a few steps ahead, a petite figure in navy blue with her hands clasped in front of her and her chin up. Charlotte didn't ask any child to be in that room. She had to. Camilla stood still across from them. She had on a black coat with a high collar. Her face still looked noble, but it was starting to seem worn out. She painted her lips perfectly. Her eyes were steely with anger. She stated plainly, "I'm not going to be put on trial." William didn't move. "You're not on trial?" Camilla let out a tense breath. "Then what is this? A show? A ceremony of shame? Should I bow before I leave?" Catherine spoke softly. "You were asked here to listen to hear what this moment demands. No more, no less." William stepped forward, even though Camilla laughed. "You hit a child. You hit the crown's heir, and when asked about it, you lied. I punished her," Camilla said angrily. "And I was angry." William's voice stayed calm by the truth. "She told you something you didn't like. She didn't insult you. She corrected you. And you hit her." Camilla stood up straight. "I am the wife of your father." "You were," he said quietly to correct her. "That status is now up for review." Her throat got constricted. "You'd take away my title for a mistake?" "No. I would take away your access, because you are undermining the very legacy you were supposed to help protect. The monarchy is not a place to hide your anger." She moved forward. "And you think this man?" She pointed to Denham. "This statue in uniform represents the monarchy better than I do." William looked at Denham, then at her again. "He kept my daughter safe when others froze when I wasn't there. And when you crossed a line that no title can excuse," Camilla's voice got quieter, and the mask fell off. "You'll be sorry for this." William's answer was not mean. Not today. Not ever. For a long time, the only sound in the room was the sound of breathing, breaking the silence of hundreds of years. After that, Charlotte moved forward. She didn't say anything. She just put her hand on Denham's wrist, and that was it.